This is the eLearn podcast, episode number 76.
I wrote it as one giant lesson plan. So, when you teach something, you define your terms, right? Like these are the new vocabulary words that we're going to learn today. And these are key things that, these underlying concepts that you need before you start. And these are some tips and tricks that, errors to watch out for, common issues.
Welcome to the eLearn podcast. My name's Laddick, and I'm your host from Open LMS. My guest for today is Courtney Ostaff, a bona fide classical teacher who realized that after seeing so many of her colleagues struggling with teaching online, she had to help bring some clear signals into the noise. The result is her book titled The Online Teaching Handbook, a refreshing, no-nonsense guide written by a proven and experienced educator. If you've never quite gotten comfortable with the new normal, Courtney has your back. If you are one of the countless teachers who think to themselves before every online session, I did not sign up for this, Courtney will be the first one to agree with you. In this soul-searching conversation, Courtney and I talk about why she believes teachers should take back their classrooms by playing to your strengths, even if that means putting live online sessions on the back burner. We also talk about why replicating the face-to-face experience online can be quite, impossible, frankly, and why it's worth remembering that live video tech is experimental relative to established educational practice. We also talk about the importance of boring for learning outcomes, clear lists of tasks, systematic examination, and a consistent routine is going to do wonders for your students, both academically and emotionally, and probably for you as well. And then finally, Courtney shares some tips on keeping track of outcomes and participation, turning parental supervision into family engagement, and ultimately why great teaching is indifferent to medium, but rich in back and forth communication and human focused. But before we get started, a quick word from our sponsors.
The eLearning podcast is sponsored by the eLearn Success Series, a uniquely valuable set of events that bring together sector experts and thought leaders to offer solutions to the most critical challenges and issues at the intersection of education and technology. Get your free ticket to all 4 sessions at elearnsuccessseries.com. And Open LMS, a company that provides world-class LMS solutions that empower organizations to meet education and workplace learning needs. Learn more by visiting openlms.net.
Hello, Courtney. Welcome to the eLearning podcast. How are you today?
I'm peachy. Thank you for having me.
I love that. You're the first person. I've probably recorded 200 of these things. You're the first peachy person I've ever met. That's great. Does that mean that you're in peach country?
In fact, I'm in West Virginia and we do have peach orchards here, believe it or not.
Nice. I have spent some wonderful time in West Virginia myself, and I do love it. It's quite a nice place out there. A hidden gem, as John Denver knew a long, long time ago. Excellent. Courtney, we are, recording this sort of in the middle of December 2021. I have teed you up in the introduction. I've given your profile and sort of talked about, the bullet points of this conversation, but I always like to give my guests an opportunity to introduce themselves. So why don't you give us the 2 minutes on who you are?
Well, I am a longtime online teacher. I actually started in graduate school. It was completely accidental. My boss at the time, I was a graduate assistant. My boss at the time handed it off as one of my graduate assistantship duties. And there I was in 1999 teaching video conference computer skills to the general public. It was wild and I was terrible. And then I fell into teaching online for the University of Phoenix's Community College, AXIA. I have 18 graduate hours in mathematics, for which they felt qualified me to teach college algebra. And I did it. It started out with news groups. It was completely asynchronous. And it was actually a really great training opportunity. I did that for 6 or 7 years, I think. And I was earning at the time my second master's degree in secondary education. And when I was finished with that, I was actually pregnant with my second child, and I landed a great job as a special education teacher in my local public schools. Did that for a while as a teacher of the visually impaired, itinerant. And then my second child was born with a pretty serious health condition that required my focused attention. And I happened to see a help wanted ad on Facebook for a new online middle high school, the Well-Trained Mind Academy. Sent in my resume, and I've been teaching there ever since.
Wow. I do love the serendipity of that. That's fantastic that all worked out for you. Fantastic. So you're also the author of a book called the Teaching Online Handbook. What was the inspiration for writing that book? Was it just, oh my God, nobody's doing this correctly, or, hey, I've figured out, here's the 10 best, things that I need to do, or like what was the inspiration for undergoing the, super painful, process of putting a book together?
Well, actually, it never occurred to me. Somebody else said, hey, you should write a book. And then I thought, oh, well, you are very funny. I have never written a book. Why would I do that? Right.
Sure.
I'm just a teacher, just a classroom teacher. What do I know? Right. And so it was actually North Landisman who first suggested it. And he reached out to John at Cat Educational Publishers and said, you should get her to write a book. And they said, oh, you know what? You're right. You should get her to write a book. So I did.
Fantastic. What are that? Give me a highlight. What's, as you were writing that book, or as you're writing the book, the Teaching Online Handbook, obviously years and years of experience that you drew from. Is there any one particular thing that you wanted to focus on, or is it more of a general overview? Like give our listeners a sense of what will they find when they open this book?
Well, so I wrote it as one giant lesson plan. So, when you teach something, you define your terms, right? Like these are the new vocabulary words that we're going to learn today. And these are key things that, these underlying concepts that you need before you start. And these are some tips and tricks that, errors to watch out for, common issues. And here are the general ways that you go about doing it. And then you kind of follow up with things that make it helpful, ways to make it easier for you. So like online classroom management, that kind of thing. And then in terms of teaching, I talked about like different ways to work with parents or different kinds of students. And then I follow up with special test cases at the end. So like working online with autistic students or working online with students who are deaf or hard of hearing, that kind of thing. And then end it with assessment, like you do with a lesson, right?
Nice. And then sounds super, super practical. I love it. One of the questions that you had, we had talked about before was, why are written discussion questions important when teaching online rather than, just sort of being extemporaneous or, using verbal cues in online teaching?
Well, so the first thing that I'd like to point out is that a lot of people think that teaching online implies live or synchronous discussion with Zoom or whatever. And to me, that is the smallest part. That is the least part of what I do and how I design my classes. It's icing on the cake. And if you can get your kids in for a live online class, either as a parent or as a teacher, that's great. That's the bonus. But if that's what you're counting on to convey information, you are starting way behind the starting line. And so in that sense, written online discussion questions are really important for bringing your class together in an asynchronous way. And can you do them badly? Sure, absolutely. I'm sure, at this point in life, we've all taken an online class and they were terrible. But you can also do them really well. And I think it's important to be able to develop that as a skill if you're going to teach online.
So give me an example of, I won't put you on the spot and say a great, written discussion question, but, juxtapose like a decent written online question as opposed to one that would be not so great.
Well, one that would be not so great would be one with a closed, limited answer, like what is the third planet from the sun, right? Like that's very, you're going to get one word, right, is your answer. And the other thing is that if you want to create a class discussion, there's not a whole lot of discussion you can do about that. There's not a whole lot anyone else could bring. So what I try to do when I write a discussion question is I always give my students options. And I use these as intermittent retrieval practice. So I don't really care which one of the three they answer because they're all going to be retrieval practice. or an introduction to a new topic, but that is more rare. So for example, in my Algebra 1 classes, I give them 3 selections every week. And one of them is a video that they can watch and has a series of follow-up questions to which they respond. Another one is a news article, usually about math in the world, the kind of like real life application questions. And then a third one tends to be some sort of hands-on project. So for example, the particular curriculum that I teach is really big on dimensional analysis. So like your basic dimensional analysis is, 12 inches and a foot. Your slightly more complicated would be, 13 cubic yards is how many cubic meters, that kind of thing. So we're moving into the 3D dimensional analysis. And I thought, in the autumn, it might be fun to think about 3 dimensions with a more hands-on tactile approach, which I think is important in math, even all the way through high school. So I had them do a very specific set of written directions for making snowflakes in 6 dimensions. So that was fun, right? And so I had them post their pictures, and some of them were absolutely fantastic. It was really great. It was fun. And in fact, I'm getting ready to put together the selections from the class for my school's social media.
Oh, fantastic. And how does that ultimately, do they get that feedback? Do they see the social media and then, that's a way for them to celebrate, understanding, or?
Oh no, that's just a bonus. I do that periodically, like, you all did a really particularly nice job on this project. Let me share it with the world. But no, they get graded on it. They get graded. And I use the same rubric no matter which question they chose, because I have other things to do with my time. I am not breaking my back over this. So they get graded. Half the weekly grade is on the quality of their initial response. And then a quarter is on how well they responded to someone else. And that requires 2 components. One, that they sufficiently acknowledge what the other person was talking about. So if the first person was talking about camping, they might say something like, "Oh, I also went camping." Right. So that's, this sort of acknowledgement. And then they have to bring in something new to the conversation. So for example, but we stopped because Lyme disease is endemic and my parents are really scared about it. And here is an article about Lyme disease. So it has to be a quality response there to get full credit. And yes, they moan and they groan and they complain about it. But what I find is that by the end of the school year, that is actually one of the things that brings them together as an online class, that sort of shared camaraderie. And I also give them a place where they can just kind of goof off, right? So that because in an online class, they don't have that sort of asides as they fill into the room, or the whispers between, slow moments. And so that lets them build that. And they make friends. They do. They make friends in the online class, which is hard.
Super hard. Yeah, absolutely. What have you, as someone who's been teaching online since 1999, what are, like, I'd love to know, what's kind of your perspective on what has evolved, what stayed the same, what are, and what are the biggest challenges for 2022 that are coming up here in online teaching or online education in general? Like what's the hottest thing, or the piece that most people get wrong that you see?
Well, the piece that I think most people get wrong is that emphasis on a live class. Not that it's not useful, it's great, but it is a relatively new piece. It is leaning on that. You cannot replicate your face-to-face class in an online class. It's a different mode of teaching. And so I don't blame teachers for like, "Oh, I hate this. I don't want to do this. This is not what I signed up to do." Because you're right. It's not what you signed up to do.
Exactly.
It is a whole different ball of wax. And I'm not so sure that I would be a fantastic face-to-face classroom teacher, because I have a different set of skills. And can you do it well? Yes, you can. The other thing is I see people dismiss it. Is this, well, this isn't real teaching. I'd be like, look, you know what? Good teaching is good teaching no matter where it happens. Do I use retrieval practice? Yes, I do. Do I, use daily homework sets? Yes, I do. Do we have low stakes quizzing? Yes, we do. It just looks a little different. That's all.
Yeah. What about working with a diversity of students? You mentioned that one of your children has ADHD, and working with students with special education needs, or you're actually certified to teach with people who are visually impaired. Talk to us about that. What are pieces that are either challenging or different, or maybe better about working with those individuals?
Well, so I think, at least for my students, and I work for a private learning services provider, I tend to have an incredibly high percentage of students with special education needs, whether that is, the profoundly gifted 8-year-old in my geometry class, or, the 18-year-old in my pre-algebra class who's really struggling with the distributive property. And that's going to range your gamut. Yes, I have had students with visual impairments. Yes, I have had students with hearing issues. Yes, I have had students with autism and ADD and, all of that. Because what happens is, at a certain point, when those become severe enough, it's a real struggle for those students to be successful in your typical public school classroom. And that's when I see them.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a really strong set of students. Now, I do have typical students, obviously, but the percentage is much higher in my classes. And so what I have found, what works for most students most of the time, is simply good teaching. Right? Because, 9 times out of 10, yes, there are special individual things on someone's IEP, but 9 times out of 10, it's good teaching. Break things into small steps, sequence correctly, give it both visually and in writing and with a hands-on component. Those are all just real basic good teaching skills.
Mm-hmm.
So you just have to be a good teacher.
That's fantastic, I guess. What and so again, so kind of coming back to that previous question as well, so circling back into what's going to happen next year. So over the last 24 months, I'm not sure that you witnessed any change because you've been teaching online forever, but the entire world went online for a solid year, or myself included. And now, campuses are opening, schools are open. We're kind of seeing the influx of back and forth. There's definitely a hybrid or blended classroom almost everywhere now. What do you see happening, in the next year, or what advice would you give to teachers who didn't sign up for this about the necessity or having this as a part of their skill set?
I would say, don't beat yourself up about it. Keep it basic. Don't stress about your office looking great. Don't stress about having the best equipment. Don't stress about, ring lights or any of that. That is all froof. You don't need that. What you need are good teaching skills. And so I would work to refine my teaching skills the same way as I would as if I was in a face-to-face class. How can I break down this lesson? What are component skills? What are prerequisite skills? How can I front load the vocabulary for this? That's where it's at. And don't rely on that live class because, especially in the United States, internet access is really inequitable by socioeconomic status. I mean, I had a series of 4 sisters who had one SIM card that they swap back and forth between devices. And maybe they made it to class and maybe they didn't, but they could still succeed in my class because coming to the live class, I don't even grade that. It's great if they get there, but you can 100% make an A in my class and never show up to a live class.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's really good. I mean, we've had a previous guest on, or actually several previous guests on the show who have talked about rethinking the entire platform. And you said this earlier as well. This is not standing in front of a classroom, essentially what you signed up for probably as a teacher. And so, but it goes even further to saying, how can I just sort of rethink how this knowledge is going to be transmitted, or how this is going, how we're going to go through this. I've had guests who talk about, doing a game show or offering students other pathways. Do you advocate for that as well? I mean, you said, solid, good teaching is really the base to go for that, but do you also advocate for really kind of thinking outside the box and transforming the learning experience?
I am fundamentally old school. So You could show up to my class and you would recognize, I think, probably everything that I do if you came and peeked in one of my online classes. Because here's the deal, right? So say that you're a 10-year-old kid and you have dyslexia, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe your handwriting's not so great. And maybe you spent last year with a whole bunch of online school and you weren't really great. Okay. It wasn't a great experience for you. So you're not looking forward to this class because it's going to be a bummer because it's boring and you just sit there and listen to people talk and blah, 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 blah. And it goes in one ear and out the other because maybe you have some working memory problems too. Right. So you show up to class. What you need is a specific list of tasks. And it needs to be short, like no more than 5 words per task. And it needs to be super clear. And I spend the first 6 weeks of any given school year teaching students how to do the tasks that I want them to do. There's a limited number of things. The content changes throughout the school year, but the tasks don't change. Every week, you're going to do a discussion question on Monday. Every week, you're going to respond to 2 other kids on Wednesday. If it's a math class, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, every day, you're going to have a problem set. And across all of my classes, every Friday, you're going to have an assessment, period. And there's no homework on the weekends. And that's it. And you got to get the routine. That's what you need. And that's what you have to teach the students because routines are so hard in an online class. So I don't care what particular, you want to do games, fine. You want to do, maybe it's Latin and you got to do translations, fine. Whatever it is, pick a handful of assignments, get them done, teach them how to do it, make it a part of their daily habits, and then you can make progress. Because then that kid with dyslexia doesn't have to read the directions every time. They know what they're supposed to be doing. They know when it's supposed to be due. And it's comforting to them. So it lowers their anxiety. So they have more working memory that they can apply to the task at hand, which is also great for like the 20% of kids that have massive anxiety because like life in the world recently, right? So,
yeah, sure.
So
100%.
making all of that, your classroom, even your online classroom, a calm, peaceful place where they feel comfortable to ask you, like, I don't remember how to do this. Can you tell me again? Yes, I will. And I'm not going to give you a hard time about it.
Talk to me, one of the things that I think of so often is in the physical classroom, you're present, you're able to sense when someone's, either not participating or struggling, those kinds of things. How do we do that in your experience in the online setting? And as a second part to that question, what role do you think and what the importance of sort of a family member or other support mechanism, the other humans in their life, how important is that? And how do you connect with them as the educator?
So I think that is critically, hugely important. And I assume, because it happens in almost every class, that my live class is being cast to the television, right? And that Auntie M and cousin Jerry and, the neighbor from down the way are all sitting in the living room watching me teach this class.
That's actually, no one's ever put that out there, but that's actually a really great perspective to have. You assume that you're being broadcast in Times Square,
Yeah, you are basically. And it's recorded, right? So they're going to go back.
Yeah.
They're going to watch it again and they can download it. So they're going to like put it on their phone. Did you see what my teacher said last week? And so that happens. So you have to like prepare yourself for that. So if you feel uncomfortable about something, then maybe you should rethink saying it, right? But also they are your partners. They are the ones who can actually stand over top of that kid and be like, finish that problem. You got 3 more problems to do, get her done. So you have to approach this as if they have good intentions, assume good intentions on their part, and then give them the tools to make that happen. That's part of the reason why every week I give a list and I give a calendar, like, on Monday this is due, and on Tuesday they should do this, and on Wednesday they should do this, so that the parents or the supervisor, or frequently it's an older sister or a cousin or even a neighbor, whoever it is making sure that gets done. So make it easy for them, but don't assume that they're going to teach it because that's not their job. Their only job is supervision. right? So you have to make sure that they can clearly see what that kid is supposed to be doing and how to know when it's done. And so that's the thing. And so I email them, I do one-to-one conferences, and it's always, I give it 2 weeks in advance. All my assignments are pushed out 2 weeks in advance. Because if you're working shift work down at the Starbucks, you don't necessarily know what that schedule is. Or if your mom's a doctor and she's pulling a 96 next week, she needs to know that you have a quiz due on Friday and exactly what's in it so that she can arrange for tutoring if need be. Right. So you got to make it easy for them. And part of the way I make that easy is to give it all in advance.
That's a really good point. What about technology? You said earlier from the teaching perspective, don't worry about the camera, don't worry about the lighting, those kinds of things. What about, on the other side of the equation there, where you had the four sisters who were sharing a SIM card? Is there things that you do or that you put out there as the educator to ease any stress around technology, make sure there's equanimity in the class, those kinds of things?
Well, I do a few things. One of them is that I make sure that my slide decks are all high contrast. They're kind of ugly, frankly. But that's okay.
But they're effective. Effective is better.
That's right. It's all about results, not how pretty it looks. So it's black and white as much as I can get it. They're high contrast. They're all screen reader friendly. So that, Siri or Cortana or Alexa or whatever can read that slide deck to the child. And so too are all pieces of documents that I hand out. They're almost always in PDF format, because you can open a PDF on a cheap Android phone. You can open on a slick, gaming desktop. You can do that. And so you want to make sure it's friendly to everybody.
And so basically device agnostic, right? But also, do you, one of the challenges in online learning is the rapid pace of things changing. So do you find that you have that? Do you have that as well, or is it mostly, in your experience, shiny object syndrome? People are like, oh, there's this new thing we've got to change, go do it. Or are there real reasons to update your class every year, or do you sort of make your material timeless?
Well, so those are actually two separate questions. So
I tend to ask those multi-layered questions. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. So I just want to be clear that I'm looking at this slightly differently. So are there shiny apps and websites? Yes. Do I use any of them? No. Okay. So there is one exception. I use an online computer adaptive software for mathematics.
Okay.
So it provides students with, step-by-step assistance, feedback based upon their errors, suggested areas of improvement, videos for that they can watch for an individual problem. So it provides them as much help on their schedule. If they're doing it at 3 a.m., they can watch that video at 3 a.m., right? And as possible. So I do use it for math, but for everything else, I just stick with my good old school LMS, my learning management system. And I know Google Classroom is not an LMS. Has a whole different discussion. But no, I don't use all those Googles because they distract from the content, because I want my students to think about the content, not the context in which they learned it. I don't even do Jeopardy in my classroom. I'm going to sit there. We got some slides. We got some examples. We're going to do some participation. I'll throw out some polls and then we're done. Old school.
I love it. I love that old school still not only holds up, but probably is incredibly effective. I'm thinking from your perspective.
I will say that the average, and I don't quote me on this because I don't remember exactly, but a huge barrier to graduating high school is passing algebra. I don't know if you know this. It's a huge barrier. Okay. It is. And it's for over half of students who drop out say that the reason they drop out is because they couldn't pass algebra.
And is that just the abstract nature of algebra because it takes you into abstraction for the first time, or?
Well, I think it's because they have poor underlying skills. Every so often, some bright young consultant out of Harvard or whatever gets hired by McKinsey or one of those companies, and McDonald's or whatever hires them. And they're like, let's do a 3rd pounder burger because the markup on that can be higher. right?
Mhm.
And therefore you'll make more money selling a third pounder as opposed to a quarter pounder. And this happens. Just look it up. You have to Google it. It's a true story. So they put out this third pounder burger and it costs more. And so people go through the drive-through and then they get really upset because 3 is smaller than 4. And why are you charging for this third pounder burger? It is a huge flop. So this is the state of American fraction understanding. Okay.
Oh,
It's
sure.
not just these kids who are dropping out, it's the general public. Think about that for a second. And frankly, if you're really poor, you're not eating at McDonald's because you can't afford it. So this is your middle class American fractional understanding. Okay. So what I find happens is that my students who come to me who really have trouble, and I designed a class to remediate this, is that they have basic fundamental mathematical gaps in their education. Now, why that is a whole different discussion. So I'm really proud of the fact that 80% of my Algebra 1 students pass.
That's awesome. Fantastic.
That means of the students who signed up at the beginning of the year, 80% of them are there at the end and they passed.
That's amazing. That's not only a huge completion rate, but it's a passing rate. It's, that's fantastic.
Yeah, like they don't have to make an A, right?
Yeah, no.
They just finish the class.
Mhm.
And so that's huge. And so, yeah, it's old school. Now, do I update my materials? Sure. If I find a better way to explain something, if I think that they need a little tweak, maybe a little extra time on this technique, yeah, I'll edit that. But do I edit the basic way that I teach my class? No. We got some slides, we got some homework sets, we got a schedule, we got a routine, and we're going to do that.
Fantastic. Well, then on that note, the final question I always ask everybody on the show is, what are you looking forward to? So we have a brand new year coming up. I mean, people will be listening to this, in the new year, but you and I are sitting here on the precipice of 2022. Is there any shiny new objects you're excited about? Are there challenges that you're excited to overcome? Or, what are you looking forward to over the next 6 to 12 months?
Well, I have the luxury of being able to pick and choose what classes I teach. And so astronomy is a real special interest of mine. I've always been fascinated. I was one of those kids who wanted to be an astronaut, right? So I am getting to teach a high school level astronomy class complete with lab next year.
Oh, wow. I'm honestly a little jealous. The discovery of astronomy. I actually just went and climbed a really big mountain, and when you get out of the city and you can see the stars in the Milky Way, and it just the inspiration of it. Even here me as this old white guy, like it inspires awe. It's fantastic.
I am so looking forward to this. It's going to be so much fun, and so but I'm designing it from scratch. That is my new project.
What's like the one thing about astronomy that you're excited to just like watch kids' minds explode about?
Well, I teach a middle school level astronomy. And one of the things that I think is really interesting that a lot of people don't realize about teaching astronomy is that Isaac Newton invented calculus totally as a side project of his astronomy studies. Like,
I'm gonna do this because I have to actually have the tools in order to figure out these other things that I'm really interested in.
Yeah, exactly like that.
Yeah.
And so what I find to be lots of fun and just totally goes whoosh and expands their reality is when you can kind of let them know that a lot of astronomy is not only is it like really big things and really small things and all that kind of stuff, that a lot of the progress and a lot of the enlightenment, a lot of the benefits that we enjoy in our current society is a spin-off of astronomy. It's kind of central to all of our life right now, even if we don't really appreciate it like that.
Super cool. Courtney, this has been a very fun conversation. Super fantastic. And I got to say, I love the old school approach personally. It's really, really refreshing to hear that. And I love that's, you got what works and you're sticking to it. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to speak with us. And I look forward to catching up with you in the new year or sometime down the way and seeing how it's going.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thanks again for tuning into today's episode of the eLearning Podcast. If you like what you heard, please do me the favor of following us on LinkedIn, Twitter, or whichever social media you prefer. Also, if you're interested in diving deeper on e-learning, I encourage you to get your free ticket to the eLearning Success Summit, where there are more than 70 hours of presentations on best practices. Just go to elearningsuccesssummit.com. And then finally, for the latest news, information, and resources about e-learning, come subscribe to our newsletter at lmspulse.com. Thanks.